We're gonna we're gonna pick up today with Matthew 16. I think we left off Matthew 18, but I might back up for a moment. For Thursday, I am going to give you an exam for the lack of sleep, prophets. I'm going to give that out on Thursday. It'll be due the following week. Today, what we're going to do, hopefully, is finish Matthew and Mark, and I'm going to move Luke back. I'm going to move Luke back so that we do Luke and Acts pretty much simultaneously. Since they're both written traditionally by Luke, it's kind of best to handle those together because they kind of work like bookends. Luke introduces the story, and then Acts continues the story, so to speak, from the resurrection on, or gives you, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story, so to speak. So for Thursday, assuming we do finish Matthew and Mark today, and I don't have a lot to say about Mark. Matthew will probably take up most of the period. For Thursday, what I'd like you to do is start John, the Gospel of John. Get through about the first, according to the syllabus, the first 10 chapters. And then we'll do the last 11 chapters or so, 11 or 12 chapters on Tuesday of next week. Hold on, let me just make sure I've got this defined well. Yeah, that should be fine. Because we spend quite a bit of time on Lazarus, and then we go into Passover. Yeah, and Jesus teaching to his disciples. And we're not spending a lot of time in the first three Gospels in terms of Jesus' specific teaching to the disciples, because we're going to get into that with the Gospel of John, which goes into it in quite a bit more detail, okay? And then probably, I'm not sure, today's what day? Today's the 5th. 2 weeks from today, might drop 1 Corinthians and replace it with Romans. Simply because it's longer than 1 Corinthians, and it pretty much introduces all of Paul's thought, if you want. So that we at least get something by Paul, since Paul's the major author of the rest of the New Testament. And then from there on, we'll just kind of play it by ear. I'm still hoping we can do the book of James and then Revelation. Okay. So, where was I? I wanted to pick up with chapter 16 in Matthew. Okay. Just after Jesus has done the second feeding of masses of people, he does the feeding of the 5,000, and then he does feeding of 4,000 afterwards. And we pick up chapter 16. Pharisees come to him and the Sadducees. Anybody know what the difference is between Pharisees and Sadducees? They're both teachers of the law. Some of them are priests, but not all of them. The pretty big difference, the pretty major difference between the two is Pharisees believed in angelic beings and an afterlife. Sadducees didn't. Sadducees believed when you die, that's it. Okay? There is no afterlife. Which is why, when will we see this? Hopefully we'll see this. We'll talk about it. At one point, the Sadducees come to him, and they say, we know you're a good teacher, you're a master, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we had a brother We knew a man, 7 brothers. First brother marries a woman. He dies. So she marries the second brother. And she goes all through all 7 brothers. They all die. Whose wife will she be in the resurrection? That is, in the life to come. They're asking that question because they don't believe there is any resurrection or life to come. They're trying to trap up Jesus. And Jesus turns the tables on them, and we'll talk about how. So that's the main difference. As soon as Jesus turns the tables on them, he gets some of the Pharisees on his side. They like that he puts the Sadducees down in that scene. Okay? So, picking up in chapter 16, some of the Pharisees and Sadducees come to him. And they say, show us a sign. Now, why do they want a sign? Why does anybody want a sign of anything? And what's meant by a sign? I mean, you'll hear presidential contenders will say things like, well, if I'm elected president, I'm only going to appoint people of such and such a belief to the courts. Depending upon the candidate, depending upon the party, person's got to be pro-choice, person's got to be pro-life, person's got to be pro-business, person's got to be pro-consumer. What's meant by all that? That's what? It's a litmus test, right? What's a litmus test? Acid, base kind of thing. So they say, show us a sign. What are they really saying? Prove to us you are who you say you are. Okay? How long do they keep asking for a sign? All right, let me put it this way. When do the Pharisees and Sadducees and other people quit asking for a sign?
When he's resurrected.
Just before then.
He dies.
When he's on the cross. What's the sign they ask for? If you are truly the Son of God, get down from that cross. Prove it. Okay? Which obviously he doesn't. Okay? So, Christ responds to them and says, chapter 16, verse 2, when it's evening, you say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. That's old biblical time, first century Jewish meteorological folk belief. Red sky at night means the feather is going to be where? The weather is going to be fair. Red sky in the morning means storm coming. Okay? In the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. That is, Christ goes on, you can interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. Well, what are the signs of the times? See, they're asking for a sign. Well, hasn't he already done some? The beginning of his ministry begins how? He goes around through Galilee, the area around the Sea of Galilee, doing what? We're told at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel. Healing the sick, making the lame walk, the deaf speak, the dumb hear, the blind see, etc. Casting out, for most people, those would be considered signs. Okay? An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. Wow. So you're all, men and women, he's non-restrictive in this, you're all a bunch of whores. Okay? You're an adulterous. When he calls them an adulterous generation, what's he kind of hearkening back to? The prophets. What do the prophets frequently refer to the people of Israel as? An adulterous generation. That's why in the book of Hosea, what does God tell Hosea to do? marry a prostitute. I'm trying to visually show you, God says, what's going on. Okay? So, Christ says, but I'm not going to give you any sign. Well, I'll take that back. I'll give you the sign of Jonah. And he leaves and departs. What do they understand as the sign of Jonah? Well, Jonah was what happened to Jonah? Thrown over the boat in the belly of the whale 3 days and then came back. Is it that? Or is the sign of Jonah what Jonah does to Nineveh? He goes, he tells them to repent, they repent, and they are saved. And who are all the Ninevites again? According to Jews, they're pagans. They're not Jews. They're not even related to Jews by any stretch. Okay? But specifically, he's talking about Jonah being essentially, to those above in the ship, dead for 3 days. And then he comes back. Okay? So, they go to the other side of the lake. They forgot to bring any bread. Remember, they had 12 baskets of bread left over after the previous feeding of the 5,000. And Jesus talks to them, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they're like, oh, shoot, we forgot bread. That's why he's angry about that. And he's like, come on, man. Listen. Do you not yet perceive? Verse 9. Do you not remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000? How many baskets? Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000? So how do you not understand? I'm not talking to you about bread. What's the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? What is leaven? It's the yeast. It's what makes the bread rise. Okay? Beware of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay? So, verse 13. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do men say that the Son of Man is? Hold on a second. Got to quit a bunch of things in here because this is not working right. Who do men say that the Son of Man is? Notice the phrase he uses there. Quit. Son of Man. Why does he use Son of Man? Why doesn't he say Son of God? Well, if you read about the phrase Son of Man in this, it refers to it as enigmatic. What's an enigma? Like a mystery. Okay? They're not sure what the Son of Man refers to. Though they do point out, if you look at Son of Man, that phrase is used 72 times in the Synoptic Gospels. All right? It's used 13 times in the Gospel of John. It's used a few other times in various letters and things like that. In the Hebrew Old Testament, okay, not the Septuagint, but the actual Hebrew one, it's used 108 times. 93 of those are in the book of Ezekiel. And they say that in the book of Ezekiel, it references Ezekiel. That is, God says to Ezekiel, not Ezekiel, say this. O Son of Man, say this, is what he says. Okay? It's used once in Daniel, but in Daniel where it's used, that part of Daniel is in Aramaic, not Hebrew. Okay? So why does Jesus use it? He's likening himself. He's connecting himself to really all of these uses. Because what is Ezekiel largely about? Two things, really. Well, I guess you could really say it's one thing. Look at two sides of the same coin. What have I said before? All of the prophets point to. The eschaton. The day of the Lord. Okay? Ezekiel is largely about the coming kingdom and the new temple. Not the new temple, a physical temple that will be built in Jerusalem, but the temple that will be Jerusalem. When? At the end. When there's a remade heaven and earth and such. Okay? So when he asked, who do men say that the Son of Man is? Notice, one, they automatically know who Jesus is referring to, himself. Okay? But they also know that Jesus is connecting himself back to these instances. That is, he's not comparing himself to Ezekiel physically, but he's comparing himself to what God calls Ezekiel. Okay? And to what Ezekiel and Daniel both refer to. Because both Ezekiel and Daniel refer to seeing one like the Son of Man, or one like a Son of Man. Okay? I once heard in a class I had on the Gospels that a lot of commentators would say that Son of Man is the heavenly appellation name for Son of God. Son of God is the earthly appellation name for God's Son. That is, the one looks at it kind of and ascribes an earthly aspect. The other looks at the same person and applies the heavenly aspect. Why? Because from heaven looking down, so to speak, what is Christ? Well, I mean, the very name says, the anointed, the Messiah. And yet, what is Christ born of? One born of a woman. Okay? From the earthly aspect, looking upwards, what is Christ? He's the Son of God, right? Because who's the Father? The Holy Spirit will come upon Mary, etc. So, who do men say that the Son of Man is? And they say, some say John the Baptist. Well, how can that be John the Baptist? How can he be John the Baptist? They lived at the same time, right? He was baptized by John. Some say Elijah. Some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Well, he is one of the prophets, right? Islam says, next to Muhammad, Jesus is the greatest prophet. Why next to Muhammad? Because Muhammad comes after Jesus, and Muhammad kind of fulfills, gives the final teaching of God. They don't accept Jesus as the Son of God at all, by any means. Which we can talk about that later. I will talk about that for a moment later. I'll bring up C.S. Lewis, maybe. Okay? So, he then says, but who do you say I am? Okay, so he asks this, what do other people think? And they say, oh, well, here's what we've heard. But who do you say that, notice, I am? Not the Son of Man. Christ just equated himself with that phrase. Peter replies, you are the Christ. That is, you are the anointed. You are the chosen one. You are the marked one. You are the exalted one. You are the once and future king. That's where that phrase kind of comes from, by the way. Right? The Son of the living God. So notice how Peter takes that phrase and just packs it full of meaning. Okay? Christ says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Simon, Bar means son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Why has flesh and blood not revealed that to Peter? Who do men say that I am? Men are what? Flesh and blood. Notice, Jesus is saying, you couldn't have said that without divine revelation. You couldn't have said that unless God told you. Why? Because all the people out there, they see me. They hear me. How close are they to the mark? Not bullseye. Peter gets the bullseye. They're all on the outside of the ring, so to speak. They're getting close. Okay? And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it. And then he keeps going on. Now, does Peter have any clue what Jesus is talking about here? Nope. Not an idea. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charges the disciples to tell. So he asked them, who do you say that I am? Peter correctly answers, don't tell anybody. Why not? Why does he want it kept a secret? Okay. So from that time, Jesus begins to show his disciples what? Notice what happens before Jesus tells them, got to go to Jerusalem and die. He gets them, through Peter, okay, to admit he's the Christ, and then he says, and the Christ has to die. That's not in their mindset. That's not in their Jewish, the anointed one, the son of David, the coming king, who will free us from our Roman overseers mindset. So, yep, you're right. I am the Son of God. I am the once and future King. I am the greatest and highest prophet of all. As Paul will write in Hebrews, the exact image and expression of God's glory. Yep, I'm all of that. But I got to die. By taking all of that information that they have and then saying, but I got to die, he's asking them, he's telling them, you don't really understand who I am yet. Okay? Instead, he taught his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Notice who's doing the killing. The elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. All those who are in power in Israel. Okay? And we're told, and Peter took him and began to rebuke him. What does that mean if Peter took him? Took him where? What does he not want to do publicly to Jesus? Publicly in terms of in front of the other disciples. Rebuke him. Peter says, Jesus, Peter, what the hell are you talking about? You can't die. No. And Christ turns the rebuking around. Get behind me, Satan. Well, that's kind of low. I mean, why does he call Peter Satan? What does Satan mean? The opposer, the adversary. It doesn't mean, get behind me, you foul, evil, pestilent, denizen of hell. Doesn't mean that. Okay? Why is he calling the adversary? You are a hindrance to me, for you are not on the side of God, but of men. But Peter just said, you're the Son of God. What do you mean I'm not on the side of God? What's Peter looking at when he sees Christ? All those things I just talked about. Deliverer. Mighty King. He's the one who's going to put... And how long does Peter maintain this attitude? What happens when the soldiers come to get him? According to one of the Gospels, Peter whips out a sword and cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest. Okay? And Jesus like, Peter, put it away. What's he going to say in that scene? If I wanted to, I could have a legion of angels. I could snap my fingers. Peter's like, yes, but I don't want to. Okay? So, Jesus tells his disciples after that, okay, Notice he shows them, he tells them, I've got to go up to Jerusalem, I've got to suffer many things, and I've got to be killed, and I'll rise again on the third day. There's the connection to Jonah. Okay? So, after he rebukes Peter, we're told, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take his cross, and follow me. Why? Well, what did Peter say? God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. I'm not going to let him kill you. Now, describe Peter physically. Is he like Pope Francis? Old, kind of paunchy? Or Pope Benedict before? Or Pope John Paul before? Or most popes are old and kind of paunchy, right? That's not Peter. How do we know? What's Peter's day job? Fisher. Not rod and reel. He goes out on a boat with a net. He throws the net out. He feels when the net is full, and then he pulls that net in, usually with just his brother. Okay? Peter would be ripped. He'd be very muscular. Even though, from all the traditions of the church, Peter's an older man. He's older than Jesus. He's in his 40s or so. Okay? But he would be muscular, and he would be very dark. Why? Because we get an account. How do they often dress when they're fishing? They don't. They're naked out there in the boat. Okay? So, if you want to follow me, what? Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Deny yourself. Well, what's the yourself that Christ is talking about there? What's part of the self that has to be denied? Kind of referring specifically to Peter, because this comes immediately after the conversation with Peter. What does Peter have to get rid of? His ideas about who the Christ is. See, Peter, as all of us do, I'm not talking about, religious stuff here. We all create images in our minds of what somebody or something is. Let's take Jesus out of it entirely. Say you're not married, you're planning on getting married, you want to get married, same fact that you're in a relationship. And the person you're in a relationship with, you're going to get married. Okay? You're engaged, as I like to say sometimes. Okay? Well, what's involved in that? You have an idea of what marriage is going to be like, right? Boom! Because once you get married, what happens to that idea? It meets reality. Okay? Jesus is saying to Peter here, welcome to reality. Thus far, how has life been for the followers of Jesus? What have they had to do to follow him? They gave up their jobs. They had to leave their families behind. I mean, Peter and Andrew were in the boat with their father. Come follow me, I'll make you. Dad's stuck there holding the bag, And they follow. What else? Have they been stoned? Not, but rocks stoned. No. Have they been persecuted thus far? No. I mean, life's not been easy. Where do they live generally? Out in the open. Okay? But they've not suffered really for it. Jesus now tells them, you want to really follow me? Then guess what? You too must go up to Jerusalem and suffer many things and die. Why? You got to take up your cross and follow me. By saying take up your cross and follow me, notice what else is he telling them. Here's how I'm going to die. Okay? What's so big about dying on a cross? Two things. One of them is Old Testament law, and one of them is Roman law. Old Testament law, He who hangs upon a tree is cursed. Cursed. So, hangs upon or from, like a gallows, lynched, if you want, is cursed by God. And he said, you got to take up your cross. You got to die on a tree. So they're kind of like, well, I don't want to be cursed by God. If I'm going to die, I want God to bless me so I go on to my great reward. Roman. How did crucifixion kill? Think of it for a moment. Here's your cross, okay? Do they just, stick the cross on top of the ground? No, because it wouldn't stand up, right? It's not like they put braces, on it to stand it up. How is a cross erected? Well, if you've ever sunk posts for a fence, for a 6-foot fence, you essentially sink the post into the ground about 2 feet. Okay? Well, these crosses aren't 6 feet tall. These crosses are probably about the height of this room, 10 to 12 feet, with arm posts about 6 to 8 feet long. So they're probably about 8 inches in diameter, or 8 inches square. So what the Romans did was they lay the cross flat after the person, Christ's example, carries it out of the town. So you got to carry the means of your own destruction. Imagine, somebody on death row today having to carry the electric chair into the room or carry the syringe in his hands. It's kind of the cruel and inhuman part of capital punishment. So you have to carry that, and then they lay it down flat, and they lay you on top of it. So you're lying down when the nails are driven through your wrists and your ankles crossed like this through both legs simultaneously. All right? You're not tied. Sometimes you can be tied by the wrist. But your feet aren't placed on a little platform. Okay? So now you're nailed there, and then they raise the thing up. And what do? Well, where it's laying down flat is right where it's going to be erected. And the end of it, so here's the ground, here's the cross, laying flat on that, arms like that, person, like that. Right here is the hole. So they raise it up, and once it reaches a certain point, that is, when the cross is at an angle like that, once it reaches a certain point where the other edge of the cross clears this part of the hole, what happens? Boom! It falls. And that hole is going to be 2 to 3 feet. It falls, and it falls with what? The weight of the person on top. So when it falls 2 to 3 feet, what happens to the person crucified? Both shoulders immediately dislocate, which is painful in and of itself. What else? The wrists, all these little bones right here, snap. So it tears. Okay? When the shoulders dislocate, you can no longer take a deep breath. So all you're doing is, you can still breathe, but not well. This is why when a crucifixion did not happen on the evening of the beginning of Sabbath, say it happened on Tuesday evening, that person who was crucified could literally be there for days. It is slow, and it's why we get this word excruciating. Excruciating means from the cross, painful death. So, you want to be a follower of me? Be ready for this. Christ is saying, for whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What? What figure of speech is that? What kind of figure of speech? That's a paradox. How do you find your life? By losing it. How do you lose your life? By saving it. Paradox is a refined form of an oxymoron. That is, a statement that doesn't appear to be true. But when you look at it more carefully, it does. It is true. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his life? What is Peter talking about when he rebukes Christ for saying, I got to go up to Jerusalem and die? Nope, not going to happen. Not on my watch. You're going to become the Messiah that we were told about. Who? The Son of David, who's going to come in and kick you know what and make us free. Meaning, we will gain the whole world. And Christ says, not that kind of Messiah. What kind of Messiah am I? Go read Isaiah 53. The suffering servant Messiah. Rejected, despised of men, he bore our stripes, he bore our sorrows, etc., etc. Or what shall a man give in return for his life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay every man. And Protestants generally have a problem with this verse. Or they should if they really look at it carefully. For what he has done. Done, not believed. He says, the Son of Man, notice, will come with his angels, and he's going to repay everyone for what they've done. That ties directly to what Christ says in Matthew 25, the parable of the Last Judgment, which is all about action, all about doing, not believing. Okay? Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, in John's gospel, the disciples hear that, but they hear it when? They hear that after the resurrection, when they're at the Sea of Galilee, just before the ascension into heaven. Christ says, there are some here who will not die, taste death, until they see the Son of Man. And they're like, who is it? Well, they're talking about John. And John's like, that's not what he's talking about. Well, when is the coming of the kingdom? Notice it's before they see the man coming in his kingdom. Well, the kingdom's already come, right? John begins, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus comes, his first words, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. But he's talking about coming, being in his kingdom when I come back. And after 6 days, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John with him. And where do they go? Mount Tabor, the Mount of Transfiguration. Why Peter, James, and John? Jesus has several times where he does things only with a few select disciples. Those few select disciples, Peter, James, and John. Okay? And he goes up, he's transfigured, and what do they see? They see Moses and they see Elijah. And Peter comes up, let's build these booths here, for you three. And he hears God, and God shuts him up. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Okay? Jesus tells him, don't tell anybody about the vision until the Son of Man is raised. And he uses the phrase again. Notice, he's using that phrase, the Son of Man, almost like that's the eternal Son of God describing the physical Son of Man. Okay? And they say, why did they say Elijah had to come first? Elijah did come. John the Baptist. Okay? So they go from there, and Jesus starts healing more people. And there's a little boy who can't be healed by the disciples. And they say, why couldn't we heal him? Jesus, because of your little faith. Well, how do we know they have little faith? Go back to Peter. You're not going to die in my watch, man. That's not faith. Peter's saying, we're strong enough. We can protect you, Jesus. Truly I say to you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there. Why the emphasis on faith? Go back for a moment to the prophets. Every last one of them says, who will see, not physically, not while they're alive, who will see the quote-unquote coming day of the Lord? Those who have faith. Okay? So Christ is equating faith here and now and the ability to do miracles with those who overcome. All right? If you have faith, he says what? Nothing will be impossible to you. And they're like, Well, the one guy comes to him. Might not be in Matthew. It might be in Mark, because I know I highlighted it. Yeah, I think it's in Mark. One guy's going to come to him and he's going to say, Master, my son is ill. And Jesus says, if you have faith, he can be healed. And he says, Lord, I believe. What's he follow that with? Help my unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief. I mostly believe, but there's part of me that doubts. Okay? So, chapter 18. They're making their way where? They're heading south, but they're climbing up in elevation. They're making their way to Jerusalem. And as they're walking, the disciples go, who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Because I think they're looking at each other. You're not going to be greatest. I'm going to be greatest. Peter's like, I was the first called. Actually, Andrew, but who's the greatest? And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them. Okay, so what's that tell us? It's not just Jesus walking with the 12. There's crowds of people still. And included in that crowd are children. He goes, come here, little boy. He sets the boy in the middle of them, so that you have Jesus sitting there. There's all kinds of tacky 19th, 20th century American paintings of this. A nice white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant Jesus with a nice white Anglo-Saxon Protestant little boy sitting on his lap. And he goes, you got to be like this. Unless you turn and become like children, you'll never enter the kingdom. Why do you have to be like a child? What's he mean you have to be like a child? Whoever humbles himself like this child, he is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I don't know. I've known an awful lot of kids who aren't very humble. So what's he mean? How does a child differ from most of us? Differently from Bill and I, because we're old. And the older you get, the more jaded you tend to get. Well, children are innocent, right? Or should be. They have wild imaginations. They look at everything through eyes of wonder. That's what he's getting at. What else? They take things on faith. We just finished last week, as one of my students in another class called, the holiday. Halloween. I don't think of Halloween as a holiday. But little kids go up to doors and do what? They knock on the door. Do they know somebody is going to be there to give them candy? No, that's an act of faith. They don't know that. So, you have to be like the children. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. Now, what has Christ just done? He's equated himself with that child. In fact, he's equated himself with every child. Again, this is going to lead to Matthew 25, or to what he says in Matthew 25. So if you receive a little child like this, you've received me. But if you cause one of these little ones to sin, it'd be better for you to have a millstone around your neck. Okay? And then he goes on with some woes. Verse 18. He's teaching, he's saying, don't despise these little ones. They're angels in heaven. Always behold the face of my Father who is in heaven, etc., etc. He gives the parable of the shepherd with the sheep. He's got 100 sheep. 99 are fine. One goes astray. The good shepherd does what? He leaves the 99. He goes after the one. Okay? If your brother sins against you, verse 15, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. That is, don't get on Twitter. If he still doesn't listen, take a couple of other brothers, go to him. Brothers there doesn't mean blood relatives, it means friends. Okay? And if he still doesn't listen to you, okay, tell it to the church. Tell it to the body of believers at that point. Okay? Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Two of you agree on earth, that's what's going to happen to you. Peter, okay, Jesus, let's bring this down into the real, the here and now. How often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Because you're talking about, if you have a problem with your brother, go and resolve that. And if you two can't, bring somebody else. So, say my brother sins against me. And Andrew's going like, what are you, I'm not going to do it. How often do I have to forgive him? 7 times? Really? 7 times? Jesus says no. 7 times 7. What's he mean by 7 times 7? Does he literally mean 70 times 7? Does he literally mean, okay, Peter, you got to keep a tally. And when he's getting up to 488, 489, 409, I don't have to forgive him. No. The 70 times 7 means as often as is necessary. So, he gives another parable. But notice this doesn't begin. And Jesus spoke to them in a parable. What's the parable of? There's a kingdom. There's a king. And the king wants to settle the accounts with the servants. One comes to him, owes 10,000 talents. He couldn't pay. The Lord orders him to be sold with his wife and children, payment to be made. So the servant falls on his knees and says, have patience, I'll pay you everything. And the Lord takes pity, forgives him the debt. But the same servant goes out, and he's got a fellow servant who owes him 100 denarii. And he says, pay what you owe. The servant says, have patience with me, I'll pay you everything. And he gets thrown in jail. Okay? At the time that the King James version of the Bible is translated into King James English, there were laws on the book. Actually, the laws were written about 70 years earlier, in the 520s, 1520s. There were laws on the books that made it illegal to be poor in England. Illegal. So if you were poor, that was cause to be thrown in jail, but you were still expected to pay your debt. That's exactly what this bad servant says to the poorer servant who owes him money. So the king finds out, and what does he do? You wicked servant, just before Matthew 19, I forgave you all that debt because you besought me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant? And in anger, his Lord delivered him to the jailers till he should pay all his debt. Now, Catholics, some Catholics, I don't know that this is a dogma of the Catholic Church, but some I've known, take this text as being one of the quote-unquote proof texts for the belief of purgatory. Notice, he goes to jail till he has paid his debt. The debt can be paid while still in jail. It's taken out of him, so to speak. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you, what? If you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Well, go back to how he taught them to pray. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who debt against us, who owe us. So this is like an expansion of that phrase. Okay? So he finishes these teachings. He goes off to be by himself, but the crowds keep coming with him. And he heals them. Pharisees come up, and they ask him about divorce. Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Okay. They're trying to trip him up. And Jesus says, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and for this reason a man shall blah, 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 blah. And they say, okay, then why did Moses say it's okay to get a divorce? Because of the hardness of your heart. Why does he say your heart? They weren't alive when Moses was around. Christ is saying they are types of individuals. Because you're the same kind of people that was around when Moses was around. Your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. Okay? And the disciples go, come on, man. Jesus, this is hard. If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry. And he says, not everyone can accept that teaching. That is, that you shouldn't get married. So, children are brought to him for him to bless, and he does. And a person comes up to him, chapter 19, verse 16. And I meant to send you a link to a story, and I forgot to. And the person comes and says, Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life? Notice, not what must I believe. What good deed must I do? Okay? So how does Christ respond? Why do you ask me about what is good? Anybody know how the King James renders that? Why do you call me good? One there is who is good. Who's that? God. Only God is good. So, you want to enter life? Keep the commandments. How do you keep the commandments? Notice that's doing something. That's the good deed. Which ones? And Jesus goes, I don't know. Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah, I've done all these. No problem. Okay. Well, you want to be perfect? What did Jesus say earlier? Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. You want to be perfect? Okay, here's what you have to do. Go, sell what you possess, give it to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And come follow me. Sell everything you have, give what you earn from selling everything to the poor. That's the first part. Come follow me. And when the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. In, I don't remember what year, 1955, Flannery O'Connor, great Southern writer, published a short story called A Good Man is Hard to Find. You can find it on the internet. You can actually find an audio version of her reading the story, which I highly recommend. Read the story first. It's not very long. Read the story and then listen to her reading it. Because her reading it is not the same as your reading it. She's going to intone certain things. She's going to accentuate certain things that does not come across in a simple reading of the story. Okay? A good man is hard to find. I think her title is based on the King James Version of the Bible. Okay? Because the King James Version, as I said, has him say, good master, not just teacher. What good deeds must I do to him? And Jesus says, why do you call me good? There is one good, and that is God. Now, I think in the King James translation, when Christ says that, he's kind of going, good job. You recognize me. That is, he says, you see me as God. Oh, but the rest of your question. Go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, follow me. And that's why he goes away. Why? Because he's rich. Okay? Well, in this story, a good man is hard to find. Has anybody read this? One. Couple. In this story, it's about a sociopath. A serial murderer named the Misfit. Okay? And a family that's traveling to Florida. They get off on a side road. They crash. I'm not going to give all the details. And the person who comes to rescue them is the Misfit and his two accomplices. Okay? He ends up killing everybody in the family. But one of the reasons he does so is an old lady, the grandmother of the family, essentially tells him, pray, pray, pray. Jesus will help you. And he says, yes, and that's the problem. Jesus thrown a wrench into everything. And she's kind of like, what? Why did Jesus throw a wrench into everything? Because he goes on and says, if he really was who he says he was, then there's nothing to do but follow him. Do what he says. And if he's not who he says he was, then there's nothing to do but get as much pleasure as you can out of life. And for him, that means meanness. Killing people. Why? Because his life sucks. And he's going to make sure, because his life sucks, everybody else's life is going to suck as well. Okay? What's his problem? I wasn't there, he says. I wasn't there, so I don't know that Jesus is who he says he is. If I'd have been there, I'd have known. And I wouldn't be the way I am. Okay? Well, that really does what? It takes this little passage and it sums up all of Jesus' teaching in it. O'Connor's Catholic. She's a Catholic. She's an ardent Catholic. Writing in the 1940s, 1950s, deep south. Milledgeville, Georgia. Not a lot of Catholics around her. Okay? So she understands some things. But by saying, if I'd have been there, I'd have known. She's contrasting the misfit with what does Jesus say to his followers? If you have faith. See, the misfit wants what? Proof. Just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Show us a sign. Well, the misfit gets a sign. I won't talk about it. He gets a sign at the end. Boom, boom, boom. He kills the sign. Okay? He kills the sign. And then he says, she'd have been a good woman if there was someone there to kill her every day of her life. What's O'Connor mean by that? If the person that he killed had been on the cusp of death every moment, had been looking into the abyss every moment, then that person would have done what that person does at the very moment of her death. Because it's the thing she does at the very moment of her death that shows that person's faith. Everything she does before that is not faith. It's based on tradition. It's based on custom. You know, she's the church lady. She is the prototypical church lady. She has to be dressed just this way. She wants people to look at her in a certain fashion and such. Okay? So, Jesus then talks about the rich man, eye of the needle and everything, and the disciples are like, well, crap, who can be saved then? Jesus. With men, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Okay? So he goes on, and he talks more, gives more teachings. Okay? Matthew 20:17. As he's going up to Jerusalem, he takes the 12 aside and he tells them again, we're going up to Jerusalem, I've got to die. Okay? And James and John's mother come up to Jesus, and she kneels before him. And notice, the kneeling before him, that in and of itself is a supplication. Jesus realizes she wants something. What do you want? She says, put my sons on either side of you in your kingdom. That is, when you are in your kingdom, put James on one side and John on the other. Give them the positions, the places of authority. And he's like, you don't know what you're asking for. Why? One, he's going to tell them those places are already reserved for who they're reserved for. Okay. Two, you got to suffer for those. You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left, not for me to grant, that's for Daddy to grant. Okay? So he then tells them, it shall not be so among you. What's that? The rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. It shall not be so among you. You want to be great? Be a servant. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Why? Well, how's Jesus been acting his entire life? Or at least since he began his ministry. Does he walk into cities and go, behold, the Son of God. Give me the greatest place to stay. I don't want a Marriott. I want the Ritz. I want the penthouse. Does he go into the city and say, take me to your leader? Nope. He doesn't even stay in the cities. Okay? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Okay? So, he draws near. He's getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. He gets to the Mount of Olives. He sends the disciples in to get the donkey. Why? He's going to fulfill the law, etc. He talks about Jerusalem, talks about what's going to happen to Jerusalem. Okay, all the stones will be overturned. Verses 23 and following of chapter 21. He enters the temple, and the chief priests and scribes and such come up and they say, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you this authority? Well, what's the thing he's doing? The things he's doing. He's teaching, he's healing people, he's cursing the fig tree. You know, he gets almost to Jerusalem, he's hungry, there's a fig tree, there's no figs on it, there should be figs on it, it's the season for figs. And he goes, damn you! And they go back the next day and it's all withered and dead. The disciples like, wow. So by what authority? Jesus. I'll ask you a question. You answer my question, I'll answer your question. And they're like, cool. John the Baptist, remember him? By whose authority did he do the things he did? And they're like, shoot. If we give the wrong answer, the crowds are going to be angry at us. If we say he spoke from the authority of God, the crowds are going to be angry at us because we didn't pay any attention to him. In other words, Jesus put him in a nice little spot between the rock and the hard place. And they go, we don't know. I'm not going to answer your question then. Okay? Go on. More parables. 21:33, 22, Jesus spoke to them in parables. Okay? So they send somebody else up to him. Chapter 22, verse 17 and following. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? He's like, come on. Show me the money. He quotes Jerry Maguire before there was a Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. And they gave him a coin. Whose picture? Caesar's. It's Caesar's. Give it to him. Does it have God's picture on it? No. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Well, what are the things that are God's? Go back to Psalms. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Is that what Jesus means? He does mean, if you live in a country that has taxes, then you should follow the laws of that country. That is, if you have taxes, you pay the taxes. After all, look at, not right now, look at the instance of his birth according to the Gospel of Luke. Why is he born in Bethlehem and not in Nazareth? Because both Mary and Joseph are of the tribe of David. And they have to go to where David is from. Bethlehem. For what purpose? Taxation. Jewish taxation, Roman taxation. In other words, his mommy and his daddy were following the letter of the law at the time. All right? When they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. And in one of the Gospels, if I remember correctly, it said after that, and they asked him no more questions. They're kind of like, he's just going to keep shutting us up. But here, Jesus goes on. So, the Sadducees come, they ask him about marriage and the 7 brothers. He tells them, you don't understand. For they neither marry nor are given in marriage. Verses 30 and following. They're like their angels in heaven. He goes, and you're also wrong. Why? Remember, I said the Sadducees don't believe in life after death. He says, who's God? Have you not read, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. That is, when God says that, Jesus is telling us, when God says that to Moses, what's he saying? Abraham is alive, Isaac is alive, and Jacob is alive with me. Okay? A lawyer comes up. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. First and greatest. Second's like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? On these 2 commands depend all the law and the prophets. So then he, without prompting, asks the Pharisees a question. And he asks them about the most quoted psalm in the Bible. From that psalm forward, it's the one quoted the most. Okay? What do you think of the Christ? Whose son is he? And he says, the son of David, they said, the son of David. Jesus said to them, Matthew 22, verse 43, how is it then that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord, saying, this is the most quoted psalm in the Bible, Psalm 110. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I put thy enemies under thy feet. If David thus calls him Lord, how is he his son? That is, if the Lord is the son of David, why would David call him Lord? Because David, Jewish law, Jewish custom, what? David is his Lord. Why? Because David's his father. It's part of the honor thy father and mother commandment. And they're like, over our pay grade. So then they don't ask him any more questions. And then we get the 7 woes, or 5 woes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, there's another one in there somewhere. It's the 7 woes, where he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, etc. Woe to you, blind guides, hypocrites, hypocrites, hypocrites." Why? Well, he does all those woes after Matthew 23:3. Practice and observe what they teach, not what they do. For they teach or they preach, but do not practice. Go back and look at Zechariah. What is Zechariah, the first half largely, second half largely about? 9 through 14. False shepherds, false teachers. Okay? So, 24. He talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, and the disciples ask, "When will this be?" He says, "Can't tell you. I don't even know." Verse 13, though. "But he who endures to the end will be saved." Well, let me back up. Verse 9. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake." Go back to the Beatitudes. What's one of the last Beatitudes? This is at the beginning of his ministry. "Blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you for my name's sake, and your reward shall be great in heaven." Okay? He starts his teaching with that. If you follow me, don't expect an easy life. Now, just before his death, they're going to deliver you up to tribulation. They'll put you to death. You will be hated by all nations. So what is he saying for his followers? What do you hear in the national press today, or what do you hear by a lot of Christians, let's say, in the national press? Oh, everybody hates us. People aren't treating us nicely. You know, the whole woke culture and all that, you know, because we're against this, we're against that. And we used to be a Christian nation and blah, blah. Christ is saying, if you expect life to be happy, if you expect life to be easy, you're not my follower. "But he who endures to the end will be saved." Verse 13. "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come." So what's that? What's the gospel of the kingdom? Expect a hard life and overcome it. Doesn't mean live through it. Because obviously, if they're going to put you to death, you're not going to live through it. Okay? And then he finishes. Okay, he talks about the desolation of the abomination, you know, and such, spoken by Daniel. Verse 34. "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not." What's these things? Well, he's specifically talking there about Jerusalem. He's generally, however, talking about what? The last age, so to speak. See, a lot of people interpret, for example, Revelation, the quote-unquote end times. When is that? It's way in the future at some point. No. According to Jesus, when's the end time? I'm here. When he comes, that inaugurates the tribulation. Okay? That's what people live through. But of that day and hour, that's the final day, that's the last day, that's the day of the Lord. No one knows when that's going to come. Chapter 25. He gives the parable of the maidens with their lamps. Okay? Verse 31 and following, chapter 25. Parable of the Last Judgment. "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he'll separate them one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats." Now, one from another, that sounds like he's going to say, okay, this nation over here, You go to my right hand, you're good. This nation, no, the nations are going to come. And he's going to go, okay, you, number one, come forward, goat. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, O blessed of my father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Notice, each one of those is an action. None of them is a belief. You did what? You fed me, you gave me drink, you welcomed me, you clothed me, you visited me, you came to me. And they're going to say, when? When did we see thee hungry and feed thee, or thirsty and give thee drink? When did we see thee a stranger and welcome thee, or naked and clothe thee? When did we see thee sick or in prison and visit thee? And the king will answer them, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. What did he say about the little children? Receive one of these little children, and you receive me. The King James, in as much as you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. Those to the people on the right. And then he's going to say to those on the left who go into eternal darkness, depart from me. Why? Because I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, you didn't give me drink. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. I was sick, you didn't visit me. I was in prison, you didn't come to me. When? Inasmuch as you didn't. Okay? Now think of that. For the followers of Christ, what does that mean? Put yourself in the disciples' sandals. I was going to say shoes. They didn't have shoes. They didn't wear shoes. Put yourself in the disciples' sandals. What does that tell them to do? Somebody knocks on the door at night. What should you do? You better answer it. You're walking down the street with the other disciples, and there's a poor beggar. What should you do? You better feed that person. Okay? We haven't talked about the parable of the rich man and Lazarus because it's not in. Or have we? Don't think we have. I think it's only in John's Gospel. Okay? So he talks about the Passover coming. And Passover happens. He says, one of them is going to betray them. He says, you're all going to leave me. Peter says, never. Before the cock crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Peter doesn't believe him. And we see Peter deny him 3 times. Why is it significant that Peter denies him 3 times? Again, we don't see it in this gospel. We don't see it in Mark. We don't see it in Luke. We see it in John's gospel. After the resurrection, what is Christ going to say to Peter 3 times? Do you love me? And Peter's going to go, yes, Lord. Feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord. Feed my sheep. 3rd time. Do you love me? And Peter's getting really upset. At this point, I already told you. He's getting upset and worried. Like, he doesn't think I love him. I'm going to be one of those in the outer darkness. Why does he say, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? No, I do not know him. No, I do not know him. No, I do not know him. The 3 yeses cancel out the 3 no's. This is Peter's redemption, so to speak. Story-wise. Think of it literary story-wise. This is Peter's opportunity to say, I was wrong, I was wrong, I was wrong. Okay? So, Christ gets crucified. He cries out in a loud voice, 26:45. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And they say he's calling on Elijah. And they've already said, if you're the king of Israel, come down from the cross and stuff. Notice he doesn't. They take that to mean he's not. Why? What's still in the minds of the leaders? Who's the king of Israel? What kind of king is that? He's not Charles of England when he becomes king. Because when Prince Charles becomes king, what kind of king will he be? He'll be a namby-pamby, limp-wristed, ineffectual. He won't be a real king. He's a monarchical head figure. They're thinking king how? David. David, a military leader who will do what? Throw off Roman occupation, who will usher in a real kingdom, not that kind of kingdom. That's why Jesus says, when Pilate questioned him, my kingdom is not of this world. But notice when Pilate has him crucified, what does Pilate put on the cross? King of the Jews. And he puts it in 3 languages. Why? One, that's Pilate saying that. It's not the Jews. Okay? And in early church history, and in fact, I think it's in Acts, what do we find out about Pilate's wife? She's a believer. She's a believer. So when she says, have nothing to do with this man, she's kind of going, Ixnay on the Illinke Jesus J, don't. Okay? So, he's crucified, darkness covers the earth, there's an earthquake, the graves open, dead people walk, the curtain in the temple is rent from top to bottom. Why top to bottom? Think symbolism, think literary metaphor. What does the curtain in the temple, first of all, indicate or symbolize? Where is it? It covers, it covers the Holy of Holies. Where the Ark of the Covenant is, that has the cherubim sitting on top of it, it separates that from the outer part. Okay? The Holy of Holies is where the high priest goes in one day a year. The guy with the bells on offers a sacrifice. If it's accepted, he comes back out fine. Zechariah, we're going to read about in Luke. Zechariah goes in, John the Baptist's father, goes in. It's his turn to serve as high priest. He has a vision. He comes out and he can't speak. Okay? Well, the curtain gets rent from top to bottom. How do Paul and others interpret that? That's God going, I've made the way. It's not rent from bottom up. It's not by human ingenuity that the way is open. It's God saying, I've fixed the way. Okay? So, Joseph of Arimathea takes down the body in Matthew 28. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything about Matthew 28. So I didn't say anything about Mark, but there wasn't a lot of Mark. There's one passage in Mark that I wanted to discuss, which I'll do on Thursday. So read John's Gospel, first half or so, for Thursday, and I'll find that one spot in Mark that I wanted to point. Oh, there it is. That I wanted to point out. And we'll talk about that briefly, and then we'll go into the Gospel of John. Come on, wake up. Wake up.